Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the warnings and advisories that we do have out for the state. Starting off in the Panhandle area, in the very southern portions, we have a warning that is out until 7 p.m. tonight. That is a high wind warning, so watch out for loose debris. And then also near Sitka, another high wind warning. That one is out until 10 p.m. this evening. As we move up to the north, we do have several wind advisories throughout the interior. The one near Tanana here, that's going to be out just until 6 p.m. tonight, so winding down with that one. And then we have the three further to the north. Those are all out kind of in the central interior to the northeastern part of the interior. We do have those out until 6 a.m. on tomorrow morning, on Wednesday morning, 6 a.m. Wind advisories for those as well, primarily for summits and higher terrain areas. Moving now to our satellite imagery, you can see our main low pressure here south of Kodiak starting to slow down its progression, moving just to the southwest of Kodiak, bringing cloud cover across all of the southern part of the state, some areas a little bit into the interior. Further out east, we have another weak low underneath this, pushing in, bringing in some rain and showers, cloud cover out to the Panhandle area. And then finally we can see off to the Bering side, way out west here, we have another low weakening out in the western part of the Bering Sea, bringing some cloud cover to areas of the northern part of the Bering. As we look now at our remainder of the day weather, we can start off with the low out in the Bering. We have some snow out in the northern and western part of the Bering Sea. We have another system coming in from the south, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the western Aleutian Islands. But as we look over mainland Alaska, we can see our main low here south of Kodiak Island, bringing a lot of rain to the island areas along the Aleutian Range down into the Alaska Peninsula. Some rain also into parts of southwest Alaska, but as we get more into the Bering, a little bit of colder air out there, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the eastern parts of the Bering Sea. Much of the interior should be pretty clear in terms of precip, with some cloud cover creeping in from the south and some lower clouds up further to the north in the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline. Then as we drop down into the south central part of the state, we have rain along the North Gulf Coast, all around Prince William Sound, transitioning to snow, especially in the higher elevation areas, and that's true in the Alaska Range as well. Then way out by the Wrangell St. Elias, seeing some snow out there, some snow near Yakutat area, and then some rain down in the Alaska Panhandle area. As we get further north and further towards mainland, we are going to see more snow mixing in, especially at the higher locations there. Moving into tonight, some lingering showers in the Panhandle with some snow up by the Haines-Skagway area. Then our weak low out in the northern part of the Gulf, bringing in some rain, continue to the northern Gulf coastline, eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island as well. As we get closer towards Valdez, Thompson Pass area, and other areas that are in higher elevation, we are going to see more snow mixing in, and in the western part of the Alaska Range as well. Interior part of the state out through the Seward Peninsula area up through the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline should be void of precip overnight, but we will see some cloud cover creeping in, especially from the south from that low down in the Gulf. So we drop down the west coast of the state, YK Delta, expecting to see some fog tonight, and then in the Bristol Bay area, some rain out there. Weak troughing out over the northern and eastern part of the Bering Sea, bringing in some rain to southern locations, transitioning more to snow as we get further to the north there. And then our system way out west, staying south of the Aleutian Islands as it slowly tracks to the east, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the central and western Aleutian Islands tonight. Moving into Wednesday, that system still slowly moving off to the east, bringing a mix of rain and snow now to the eastern Aleutians and central Aleutian Islands. Further out to the east by Kodiak Island, we have a weak low pressure system there. That is bringing some rain to Kodiak Island, through the Bristol Bay area, and to the Alaska Peninsula as well. As we look through much of mainland Alaska, as we've seen overnight. We do have a lot of clearing in terms of precipitation for the interior down into the YK Delta, Seward Peninsula, along the Arctic coastline. But as we drop down to the North Gulf Coast area, we are going to see some rain for Prince William Sound area especially, but then in a lot of the higher elevation area by Wrangell, St. Elias, and through the Alaska Range, we're going to see some snow there. And then around Cook Inlet, we will see some isolated areas of rain. Down in the Panhandle, much of the rain is pushed off to the south, so we will see some lingering showers out in the southern portions of the Panhandle by Ketchikan area. Then on Thursday, we have our broad area of low pressure out in the southern part of the Gulf, bringing in that southeasterly flow to the Panhandle area, bringing some rain to areas in the south and up along the coastline as we get further to the north. A little bit colder by Haines and Skagway, seeing some colder temps, bringing us some snow there on Thursday. As we move up the eastern side of the state, low pressure bringing in some snow in the higher elevation of the Alaska Range and down into Wrangell, St. Elias. But as we move further to the north, we're going to see a mix of rain and snow, where rain at the lower elevations, and we're going to see snow as we get to some of the higher elevations in the mountains. Then along the Brooks Range, the Arctic coast, central and western parts of the interior out towards the Seward Peninsula, no rain or precip of any kind expected on Thursday. Dropping down into the Bristol Bay area up by McGrath, we are going to see some rain there. And then as we get out over the Bering Sea, this northerly flow bringing enough cold air to see a mix of rain and snow as we get into the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands. Then way out west, we have a new system coming in, bringing more warm air, but as it initially approaches the western Aleutian Islands, going to start off as snow and then transition over to rain. Our lows expected for Wednesday morning, starting off in the Aleutians, we are going to see temperatures go into the mid-30s with right at freezing for St. Paul. As we move into the Bristol Bay area, just above freezing there, mid-20s for the YK Delta area, and into the lower 20s for the Norton Sound area. But as we get Kotzebue Sound area in the teens there, and then at or below zero for the Arctic coastline. Coldest there around the Dead Horse area. And as we drop down into the interior, northern parts of the interior in the teens, as we get into southern and eastern locations in the interior, you're going to see low temperatures in the mid-20s. Mid-30s for much of south central Alaska, with 40s along the coastline, including Kodiak Island. And then we have in the Panhandle area, temperatures dropping to right around 40 degrees. Highs for Wednesday afternoon, getting up into the upper 40s to around 50 degrees for the Panhandle. Warmest along the coast into the south central part of the state, into the mid-40s to right around 50 for highs there. Some of the more interior locations, such as Talkeetna, getting a little bit warmer there, 51 degrees Wednesday afternoon. Then in the interior part of the state, eastern portions of the interior, mid-40s, but as we move further off to the east, mid-30s expected there. Galena, 37 degrees Wednesday afternoon, 42 for McGrath. As we move up into the Brooks Range, in the 30s for the most part, and as we move north of the Brooks Range, temperatures staying pretty cold, only getting to the lower teens along the Arctic coastline. As we move over to the Kotzebue Sound area, we do have Kotzebue itself getting up to 26 degrees, and then in the lower 20s as we get further to the west. Gamble out there at 27 degrees, high for Wednesday afternoon. In the lower 30s for much of the Norton Sound area, with Nome at 31 degrees. However, as we get into the YK Delta area, temperatures warming up quite a bit. Bethel at 44 degrees for a Wednesday afternoon high temperature. Macoriac at 36, around the Bristol Bay area, mid-40s there. And then staying in the lower 40s to just below 40 for the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul at 40 degrees for an afternoon high on Wednesday. Lows for Thursday morning, staying out in the Pribilof Islands, 30 degrees expected low for St. Paul. And then as we move into the Aleutian Islands, dropping down into the lower 30s, but staying just above freezing for the Aleutian Islands. In the Alaska Peninsula, we are going to see temperatures dropping down into the mid to upper 30s there. And then in the Bristol Bay area, we are going to see temperatures in the mid-30s there, with Dillingham at 36, Keen Salmon 35, Iliamna at 37 degrees, expected lows for Thursday morning. The YK Delta area, mid to upper 20s, with Macoriac at 25 degrees. Moving into the Norton Sound area, we have minimum temperatures in the teens to right around those lower 20 amounts. And as we move up to the Kotzebue Sound area, to the lower teens there, right around 10 degrees, with Shishmaref at 10 degrees, and then along the Arctic coastline just below 0 degrees there, getting some of those negative numbers still Thursday morning for the Arctic coastline. Down into the Brooks Range, we do have Temperatures starting to get above or into the teens as we get into the southern locations of the Brooks Range, but through the pass we're going to see temperatures there right around 4 degrees. Arctic Village only are going all the way down to 3 degrees. Into the interior, for the most part throughout much of the interior, we are going to see temperatures dropping down into the mid-20s. And then as we move down into the south central part of the state, mid-30s for the most part. However, places like Glen Allen getting a little bit colder there at 24 degrees. Cordova actually getting down pretty low to 29 degrees, and then Kodiak going down to 40 degrees. Mid to upper 30s for the most part for the Panhandle area, with Sitka getting a little bit colder or staying a little bit warmer there at 40 degrees. Thursday afternoon, we are going to see temperatures rising back up into the upper 40s in the Panhandle, with Haines actually being one of the warmest places at 51 degrees in the afternoon. For south central Alaska, warmest in the state on Thursday afternoon, getting up into the lower 50s for many locations, into the mid 40s in the interior, single digits along the Arctic coastline. And as we move to the west coast of the state, temperatures rising as we get further to the south, with mid 40s by the time we get to the YK Delta, and lower to mid 40s for the Aleutian Islands. We'll be back quick with the aviation forecast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For our aviation segment, we'll start off with a quick look at our flying weather. Way out west over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we have a lot of MVFR conditions with some IFR conditions sneaking into the northern parts of the Bering, eastern parts, and along the YK Delta area. All along the west coast, we do have MVFR conditions, with the southern side of the Kotzebue Sound area seeing some IFR conditions, and then some IFR conditions from about the central part of the Arctic coastline all the way out to the west. Some isolated areas of MVFR conditions around the Alaska Range up into parts of the interior and all along the north Gulf Coast. That does include the Panhandle area as well, with some isolated IFR up by the Haines-Skagway area. Then on Wednesday afternoon, things are going to clear up for the most part in the Panhandle area. Still a little bit up there by Haines and some by or north of Yakutat. We are going to have some MVFR conditions all around south central Alaska, but much of the interior up through the Brooks Range going to be VFR conditions Wednesday afternoon, with some areas of MVFR along the north slope. Down in the southwestern part of the state, MVFR conditions there, with some IFR out over the northern and eastern parts of the Bering Sea, MVFR for the rest of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Then on Thursday morning, we are going to continue to see MVFR conditions throughout the Bering and Aleutians, with IFR out by the eastern part of the Bering Sea and Alaska Peninsula. Up along the west coast of the state, a lot of MVFR conditions expected there, and then IFR as we get along the Arctic coastline. Are going to see a lot of MVFR conditions throughout much of the interior, down through south central Alaska as well. For the Panhandle, much of it should be VFR, but as we get closer toward the mainland, we are going to see some more MVFR conditions there on Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, going to see a lot of MVFR conditions, especially in the southern areas of the Panhandle. But as you move towards south central Alaska, primarily VFR conditions with some MVFR on the eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island area. Much of the rest of south central and into much of the southern part of the interior, you're going to see VFR conditions. But as we get further to the north and out to the west, going to see MVFR conditions with some IFR conditions on the northern side of the Brooks Range. Along the west coast of the state, we are going to see some MVFR conditions from the Kotzebue Sound area all the way down the west coast, and then widespread MVFR conditions for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, with some IFR conditions creeping in from the west by the western Aleutians. As we look at our passes, we'll start up north, Anaktuvuk Pass. MVFR conditions expected to improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon on Wednesday. However, Radigan Pass nearby will be VFR throughout the day. Lake Clark and Marylebone starting off VFR but dropping down to MVFR conditions. Rainy Pass will also start off VFR and drop down to marginal. Windy Pass should be marginal throughout the day on Wednesday. Isabel Pass will start off VFR but drop down to MVFR. Mentasta Pass starting off MVFR, improving to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Tanita Pass should be down MVFR all day. And Portage will start off MVFR but drop all the way down to IFR. Out by Chilkoot and White, going to start off in IFR but improve to MVFR in the afternoon on Wednesday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, surface freezing line just to the north of the Panhandle, going through south central Alaska, out through southwest, and then out into the Bering Sea. We have some areas of warmer air trying to sneak into the southwest part of the state, and up on the northwest coastline, also some warmer air up there. For our icing, starting off in the Panhandle, worst of it's going to be down in the southern part of the Panhandle between 2,000 and 6,000 feet. Over south central Alaska, above 8,000 feet there, some lighter icing up to the north between 2,000 and 5,000 feet, between 2,000 and 6,000 feet over southwest Alaska and Kodiak Island, and then between 1,000 and 3,000 feet for the central and western Aleutians. For the jet stream coming down just to the south of the Aleutians, 110 knots, getting up to as high as 130 knots as it digs further to the south, but coming over the Panhandle area through south central Alaska, 80 knots out of an easterly direction. Taking us down to 9,000 feet, flow primarily out of a southeasterly direction, 15 to 25 knots over the state, strongest in the central part. Stronger winds over the southern part of the Panhandle, 40 knots there, and 40 knots again over the Kenai Peninsula. Dropping down over the Bering Sea, 10 to 15 knots there, till we get by the western Aleutian Islands, 35 to 40 knots out of a northeasterly direction. So we move out there. Pretty weak out over the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Panhandle, only about, or the Alaska Peninsula, 5 to 10 knots there. As we look down at 3,000 feet now, pretty similar flow northerly over the western part of the Bering Sea, 10 to 20 knots strongest to the west, but as we get by the western Aleutians and further to the south, 40 to 45 knots out of that northerly direction. Out over the main part of the state, primarily an easterly flow moving across, stronger in the interior part of the state, 20 to 25 knots, and then just off the Arctic coastline, 25 knots there. Really strong winds over Kenai Peninsula, 50 knots there, and 40 knots over the southeast. That leads us to our turbulence below 5,000 feet over the southern Panhandle, 5,000 feet below 5,000 feet along the Arctic coastline, our north Gulf Coast, and below 4,000 feet by central Aleutian.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Dehne and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Dehne's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox. It's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state. Which
you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy, and it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. Along the west coast, we do have ice still continuing to melt under the warmer conditions out there. And with the easterly flow that we have been experiencing, we have more of that ice pushing away from the coastline. We also have some areas still in the northern part of Cook Inlet that are also melting. Taking a look at the marine part of the marine forecast, starting off in southeast Alaska, we do have northerly flow in the inside waters, 15 to 20 knots there, seas 3 to 6 feet, highest to the south. And then along the eastern part of the Gulf of Alaska, we have easterly flow 20 to 30 knots, stronger to the south, and then up by Yakutat as well at 30 knots there. For Thursday, in the inside waters, we have southeasterly flow 15 to 20 knots until we get way up north. We have channel terrain there, leading to northerly winds around 10 knots. Southeast winds around 30 knots for the Gulf, and that is up until we get to the Yakutat area, dropping down to around 20 knots there. For the south central area, primarily an easterly flow going around the northern Gulf coastline, around 40 knots in the Gulf, and then as we get into Prince William Sound, 25 knots there. For the Cook Inlet area, northerly flow 20 to 25 knots, getting up to as high as 30 knots as we get to the western part of the Barren Islands area. Then on Thursday, still seeing northerly flow in Cook Inlet, 10 to 20 knots, strongest further to the south, 5 feet for seas out there. Then along the North Gulf coastline, we do have 15 to 20 knots there, up to as high as 25 knots down by the Barren Islands. And then in Prince William Sound, pretty light flow around 10 knots. Wednesday, we have a somewhat northwesterly flow around the Alaska Peninsula. That is going to be 15 to 25 knots, strongest south of the peninsula, and then as we get up towards the Shelikof Strait area, northeasterly flow around 30 knots there. Then on Thursday, we do have northeasterly flow around Kodiak Island around 20 knots, seas up to as high as 8 feet south of Kodiak Island. Then we have northerly flows that get to the peninsula area, 20 to 25 knots there, strongest on the Bering side, seas as high as 10 feet, strongest on the Pacific side. Then on Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands, way out east, we have northwesterly flow, 15 to 20 knots. But as we get west of those eastern Aleutian Islands, we do have flow out of an easterly direction. Starting off at 15 knots, increasing as we get further to the west, as high as 30 knots. And then way out by Shemya area, we have northerly flow, 30 knots there. Seas getting up to as high as 18 feet as we get in between the western and central Aleutian Islands. Then on Thursday, flow becoming more westerly, 30 to 25 knots there, 10 to 11 feet for seas. And as we look out over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, northwesterly flow primarily right around 30 knots, seas up to as high as 16 feet, higher on the Pacific side. Along the west coast of the state, primarily northerly flow, strongest up here by St. Lawrence Island, around 25 knots there, and then 10 to 15 for much of the eastern part of the Bering Sea out by the Pribilof Islands as well. On Thursday, still seeing that northerly flow, still strongest by the St. Lawrence Island area, 35 knots out of that northerly direction there, seas as high as 8 feet up there, and then dropping down to 15 to 20 knots for the remainder of the northern and eastern part of the Bering Sea. Up along the Arctic coastline, we have easterly flow around 20 to 30 knots, highest as we get out into the Beaufort Sea area, and then down the coastline around 20 knots there, picking up to 25 down by the Bering Strait. Then on Thursday, we do have northerly flow through almost the entire area, around 30 knots for most of the area. Until we get down by the Seward Peninsula, we are going to see it a little bit stronger there, gale force winds at 35 knots. Seas getting up to as high as 8 feet south of the Bering Strait. Taking a quick recap for tonight's weather, we have a weaker low out over the northern part of the Bering Sea, bringing some snow up towards St. Matthew Island area. We have another system coming up to the central and western Aleutian Islands, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the central and western Aleutians. A strong push of warm air, however, could change over to all rain. We do have some lingering showers out by the Alaska Peninsula area tonight, a mix of rain and snow. And then out along the North Gulf Coast with low pressure out in the northern part of the Gulf, bringing in rain all along the coastline, including the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas. So you get to some of the higher elevation areas like the Alaska Range and into the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains, we are going to see it mixing with snow. However, all of the interior out by the Seward Peninsula and up along the Arctic coastline, not going to see any precipitation tonight. Down in the YK Delta, however, there is enough low-level moisture that we will see some fog developing overnight. And then down in the Panhandle area, we will have some rain that's going to be cold enough in the more northern locations around Haines and Skagway to see some snow mixing in. For Wednesday, we are going to see some lingering rain showers in the southern part of the Panhandle. Much of the rest of the Panhandle should be clear. And we will see some rain along the North Gulf Coast, mixing to snow at higher elevations in the rest of south central Alaska. And then a mixture of rain and snow for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula with system coming up from the south. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.